Hello guys and welcome to another video and welcome to take 3 of this video regarding inflation. Because unfortunately, Nick, what's happened to the first 2?
Audio's gone.
Audio's gone. So we are going to do a better take this time, but you're going to have to take my apologies on the fact that I've written everything out. But hopefully that'll act as more prompts and I'll be able to go through things in a bit more detail. And the key thing on this whole video is how we're going to make inflation work for you and how I make inflation work for me. Because I think that's the most important thing, just to understand what it is, understand why it's here to stay, and then understand how to make it work for you. Because I always say, don't try and change the game, just learn the rules and play it to the best of your ability. So before we get into the video and before I give you all that data, if you could possibly give this video a big like, it helps me out with the algorithm and I really do appreciate it. And if you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing. We give away the dividends from our dividend portfolio every single month to a lucky subscriber. And on top of that, hopefully very shortly, we'll be giving away an investment property so that we have the opportunity to change somebody's life for the better. Now, what is inflation? Let's get into the video and understand what inflation is. So essentially, inflation is a decline in purchasing power over time of money. So let me give you a reference point of that. If you look at a Freddo, for example, now I'm 40 years old or just coming up to 40. A Freddo in my time was 10p. Now, judging inflation on the price of Freddos is not necessarily a mathematical way of doing it, but I believe a Freddo in today's market is 35p. Now, has a Freddo become worth more? Has it got more brand value? Maybe, but ultimately it's the same amount of chocolate and it's become worth more over time. Or has money become worth less? I think the reality is money's just become worth less. And that is what inflation is. That's a good illustration of what inflation is. Now, why is it important? It's incredibly important. It means that you don't delay purchases. So let's consider a world where we had deflation, i.e. the money that you had became worth more every year. Well, you wouldn't want to spend it as quickly, would you? Because the car you're going to buy next year will become cheaper. So if you follow that logical conclusion, then with less demand, the companies will need to produce less products. They'll need less staff to produce less products. There'll be more unemployed people. And this is why deflation is so incredibly dangerous. Conversely, this is why inflation is so important. Now, inflation means that the car that you're going to buy this year becomes more expensive next year, becomes more expensive the year after. Now, that means that you want to buy today. And that's why inflation is incredibly important. It drives growth. It means that things in the future cost more, so therefore you bring forward purchases. So is it good? Is it bad? I wrote those questions up, and on the previous take we sort of went into that a little bit. But the reality is it really does depend on which side of the assets and liabilities table, if you like, you sit. Now, I'm going to teach you today on how to make inflation work for you. And we're going to have to make some assumptions on that, okay? We're going to have to assume that inflation is here to stay. And we're going to have to assume it's a reasonable rate of inflation, okay? I know there's lots of doomsayers out on the internet who might be saying inflation's going to reach 10%, 20%. That's unrealistic in my opinion. I think ultimately, and the Bank of England are forecasting, I believe, somewhere between 2 and 3% in the next 12 months. So I think that's probably where we're going to be. And the long-term average in the UK is about 3%. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that we'll be somewhere in that region moving forward. We're going to have to make those assumptions before we give these examples. But let's talk about how we can make inflation work for us, assuming a 3% rate. Well, if we look at my property portfolio, first of all, I think that's a really good place to start. Now, at the moment, it's worth about £3 million. Now, if we assume that it rises by 3% a year, i.e. by the rate of inflation, over the next 30 years, then the property portfolio should be worth £18 million. Now, the debt on it, assuming I just pay interest only, is £2 million today. In 30 years, it will still be £2 million because I'm not increasing the debt. So this is how inflation works for you. It means that assets become worth more and liabilities conversely become worth less. So you win in the spread. And this is what the rich know, and this is what the wealthy know when it comes to investing, to make sure that you win in the spread. So let's talk about the sort of assets that are going to become more valuable over time as inflation takes hold. Well, property is a very easy one. It's going to be more expensive to buy the bricks, more expensive to buy the cement, more expensive to pay the labour. Now, with all of those things being equal, the properties should be worth how much more, Nick? Just more. Just more will do. So with that in mind, we can be fairly certain that the property prices will increase over time if they're more expensive to build. Assuming, again, all things being equal, demand stays the same and we don't have a massive pandemic and half the population die. I completely accept there are some doom events that could ruin all of this. But property is one of them. The next one would be business. I've got stocks and shares here and businesses. Now, I know my writing's terrible and I apologize, but stocks and shares, these are passive businesses. Businesses are things that you're involved in, but both of those should become more valuable over time because the amount that you charge your customers should increase. The amount of nominal profit, not percentage, but nominal profit should increase over time as money becomes worth less, and therefore the value of said stocks and shares over time will become worth more. Conversely, if we look at liabilities, any debt that you have should become worth less. So let's say, for example, this year you took out a £100,000 loan, just as a random figure. Next year, assuming inflation is 3%, it's actually only worth £97,000 in today's money. So inflation essentially pays that debt off for you. So I think this is really, really important to get your head around with what sort of spread you can create when you're buying these sorts of assets. And this is why I love property, because ultimately it's a leverageable asset, whereas stocks and shares, much less leverageable. There are ways of doing it, obviously. However, property, you get a mortgage, the mortgage is fixed in value. Even if you pay interest only that term, nominally, the debt isn't going to increase or decrease. But in purchasing power after inflation, the debt's going to be decreasing by 3% every year. All the while, your rents are going to go up by 3% on average per year. The property price on average goes up by 6% per year in the UK. But let's just use inflation, say it goes up by 3%. So ultimately, you end up creating this spread where this becomes worth less, the debt, and the value of the asset becomes worth more. So it works for you twofold, and it is so important to understand this. Don't try and change the world. I mean, ultimately, inflation is so important, we have to have that demand generator. Deflation is the worst thing I can think of, and many countries have had it in the past, and it's absolutely terrible for growth. Inflation's essential. So I believe that inflation's here to stay. I think we're probably looking at between 2 and 3%. I listen to the economists. I understand the principles behind it. I think they will tighten monetary policy if it gets out of hand, like they have before. I don't think that that's likely to change. Equally, we have no deflation. I think they'll print more money until inflation returns. And ultimately, if you can just get on the right side of this assets and liabilities curve, you can win. So I hope this video has helped you. I hope it's given you an idea of what inflation is and how it can work for you. And I hope that you guys can put this information to use and make your future a brighter one. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a big like, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time.